My name is Maya Sterling. I'm 30 years old, and for the last 15 years, I have been a ghost to the people who brought me into this world. When I was just a child of 13, my own parents discarded me like a piece of unwanted furniture, leaving me on a dark porch with nothing but two plastic bags full of my existence. That last week, the past and the present collided in a way none of us could have predicted. My biological parents walked into the law offices of Sterling and Cross with arrogant strides and a private attorney, their eyes gleaming with the predatory hunger of people who believed they were about to inherit a fortune. They thought they were the rightful heirs to the empire built by my Uncle Arthur, the man who actually raised me, loved me, and taught me what it meant to belong. They sat across from me with smug, confident smiles, certain that the law would favor blood over loyalty. But when the attorney, a sharp woman named Elena Vance, broke the seal on that final envelope and began to read Clause 7, the atmosphere in that room changed instantly. My mother, the woman who once looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer her concern, shot to her feet, her face draining of all color until she looked like a marble statue of frozen horror. Her mouth hung open, her breath hitched, and the silence that followed was the heaviest thing I've ever felt. Before I reveal the words that shattered her world, I need to take you back to where it all began. If you believe that family is built on choice rather than DNA, then I hope my story resonates with you. Tell me, as you listen to this, where in the world are you? What does the clock say on your wall? I'd love to know who is out there with me in this moment of reflection, to understand why my mother reacted with such visceral shock. You have to understand the house I grew up in. We lived in a cramped, drafty colonial in the suburbs of Boston. It was a place where love was a currency and I was perpetually bankrupt. My father, George Sterling, was a man who lived in the shadows of his own home. He worked long hours as a supervisor at a local textile plant, and when he came home, he surrendered his will entirely to my mother. Evelyn was the sun our family orbited around, but she only shone her light on those she deemed worthy. My older sister, Brianna, was her masterpiece. Brianna had Evelyn's sharp wit, her striking auburn hair, and a natural charisma that made people want to please her. Everyone in town said they were two peas in a pod, and Evelyn would glow with pride at the comparison. I, on the other hand, was the image of my paternal grandmother, quiet, observant, with dark hair and a disposition that preferred books over social climbing. My mother never explicitly called me a disappointment. She simply treated me as an afterthought. The disparities weren't just emotional, they were documented. When Brianna turned 16, Evelyn threw a gala at the local country club with a live band and a designer dress. When I turned 13 3 months later, my celebration consisted of a half-eaten grocery store cake that Evelyn had brought home because it was marked down for a smeared frosting flour. There was no name on the cake. It just said best wishes. That was the summer I realized I was the spare. I discovered that Brianna had a trust fund established by my parents the day she was born, filled with years of careful deposits. When I asked why there wasn't one for me, Evelyn didn't even look up from her magazine. She told me that Brianna had big things ahead of her, and that I was resourceful enough to find my own way. That was the first time I felt the cold wind of abandonment blowing through my own living room. The breaking point arrived in the sweltering July of 2010. I had secretly applied for a prestigious maritime science internship at the University of Maine. It was a fully funded 6-week residency for gifted students. When the thick envelope arrived in the mail, notifying me that I was one of only 20 students selected from across the Northeast, I felt a flicker of hope. For one afternoon, I allowed myself to believe that my merit would finally earn me a place at the table. But that same week, Brianna decided she wanted to attend a private fashion workshop in Paris, a program that cost $6,000. That night at dinner, Evelyn laid out her plan with the chilling efficiency of a heart surgeon. She told me I would be declining my internship. She claimed that the family needed to focus our resources on Brianna's future and that my science program was a distraction we couldn't afford to support. Even though it was free, I remember the way the light hit the gravy boat as I said the word no. It was the first time I had ever defied her. The silence that followed was suffocating. I told her the scholarship was mine, earned through my own hard work, and that she had no right to take it away. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She simply leaned in close, her voice a low, dangerous hiss, and told me that if I wasn't willing to sacrifice for the collective good of the family, then I clearly didn't understand what it meant to be a Sterling. She told me I was being selfish and that selfishness had no home in her house. I thought it was a hollow threat, the kind of heat-of-the-moment rhetoric parents use when they're angry. I was wrong. 3 days later, I walked home from the library to find my life sitting on the front porch in 2 black trash bags. My mother was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, looking not like a grieving parent, but like a landlord who had finally evicted a nuisance. She told me she had called Uncle Arthur, my father's estranged older brother, and that he was on his way from the coast of Maine to pick me up. She told me I was his problem now. I sat on those trash bags for 5 hours. The sun went down, the streetlights flickered to life, and the house behind me stayed dark. My father never came to the window. Brianna never peeked through the curtains. I was 13 years old, alone in the dark, wondering what sin I had committed to be cast out so completely. When Uncle Arthur's old blue truck finally pulled into the driveway at nearly midnight, I was shivering despite the summer heat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make a scene. He just walked over, picked up my bags, and pulled me into a hug that smelled of salt air and cedarwood. "You have a home now, Maya?" he whispered. "A real one." As we drove north toward the rugged Maine coastline, I had no idea that my mother had spent the evening signing a legal document that would change the trajectory of my life. I was just a terrified child looking at the receding lights of a city that had rejected me. Uncle Arthur lived in a sprawling, weathered house overlooking the Atlantic in a small town called Port Haven. He owned Vance Maritime, a logistics and salvage company he had built from a single fishing boat. He was a man of immense wealth, though you'd never know it by looking at his flannel shirts and muddy boots. Arthur had never married. He told me his first love was the ocean and she was a jealous mistress. But when I arrived, he didn't just give me a bedroom. He gave me a future. He nurtured my love for science. He paid for the best tutors, and he taught me the intricacies of the shipping business. Under his guidance, I flourished. I graduated as the valedictorian of my high school and went on to earn a degree in international finance and maritime law from a top university. I wasn't just his niece anymore. I was his protege. By the time I was 25, I was the chief operating officer of Vance Maritime. We had expanded the fleet, modernized the logistics chain, and turned a respectable family business into a regional powerhouse worth tens of millions. On my 26th birthday, Arthur handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to my daughter. It said, "Maya, the world will try to tell you that you are defined by the people who left you. They are wrong. You are defined by the person you became after they were gone. I am the luckiest man alive to call you mine." In all those years, my biological family reached out only twice, and both times it was about money. In 2015, George called Arthur's office asking for a short-term loan to cover Brianna's mounting credit card debts. Arthur refused, telling his brother that he had a daughter to provide for and no room for parasites. In 2021, Evelyn sent me a cold, formal email after seeing an article about our company's growth in a business journal. She suggested we reconnect over lunch to discuss how the family could benefit from our mutual success. I deleted it without a second thought. In the autumn of 2024, the foundation of my world cracked. Arthur was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lung cancer. He fought for 6 months with the same grit he used to navigate storms at sea. But on a gray morning in February 2025, he passed away peacefully with his hand in mine. The grief was a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. But within 48 hours of his passing, the vultures began to circle. My mother called me, her voice dripping with a false saccharine sympathy. She told me she was devastated by the loss of her dear brother-in-law and that she and George would be attending the will reading to ensure Arthur's legacy was handled with the respect it deserved. She didn't mention my name once until the very end, when she reminded me that family always comes first. The day of the reading arrived like a funeral shroud. The conference room at Sterling and Cross was sterile and cold, overlooking the churning gray waters of the harbor. When I walked in, my parents were already there, seated at the long mahogany table with a lawyer who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. Evelyn was dressed in designer black, her pearls gleaming, looking every bit the grieving socialite. George sat beside her, looking uncomfortable but compliant. Brianna was there too, looking bored and checking her watch. They didn't offer me a seat. They looked at me as if I were a trespasser in my own life. Their lawyer, a man named Henderson, had already filed a preliminary challenge to the will, claiming that I had used undue influence over a dying man to secure his assets. They were gunning for 50% of the estate, the properties, the fleet, the millions and liquid capital. Elena Vance, the estate attorney and a longtime friend of Arthur's, entered the room and the air seemed to thin. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened the heavy leather binder and began to read. She went through the standard introductory clauses, her voice steady and rhythmic. She listed the assets, the real estate holdings in Maine and Massachusetts, the investment portfolios, the maritime fleet. My mother's eyes widened with every million mentioned. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. Elena then reached the section regarding specific exclusions. I make no provision, she read, for my brother George Sterling or his wife Evelyn. Our estrangement was a matter of their own choosing, fueled by their treatment of the only person who ever truly mattered to me. George winced, but Evelyn's expression didn't waver. She whispered something to Henderson, who nodded dismissively. They clearly expected this. They were prepared to argue that Arthur was vengeful and mentally unstable. But then Elena turned. The page in Reach Clause 7, her voice took on a new crystalline clarity. Regarding the final disposition of all remaining assets, real and personal, she began, I hereby name as my sole and absolute heir my legally adopted daughter, Maya Sterling Vance. The room went deathly silent. My mother's confident smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. She stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the hardwood floor. Adopted? She shrieked, her voice cracking like glass. What are you talking about? That's impossible. She's our daughter. You can't just adopt someone else's child. Elena didn't blink. She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of yellowed, notarized documents. Actually, Mrs. Sterling, you can. Especially when the biological parents have legally and voluntarily relinquished all parental rights and responsibilities. She slid the first document across the table. It was dated July 15th, 2010, the very night I was left on that porch. It was a formal waiver of parental interest and consent to private adoption, signed by both George and Evelyn Sterling. In their haste to be rid of a difficult 13-year-old who dared to say no, They had signed away their legal status as my parents in exchange for Arthur agreeing to take over all my future financial liabilities. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had legally erased themselves from my life to save a few dollars. "This can't be real," George stammered, his face a mask of shame. We thought it was just guardianship papers. For the school and the doctors. "You signed a full relinquishment," Elena countered, her voice like a whip. And 2 years later, in 2012, Arthur Vance finalized a formal adult adoption in the state of Maine. Legally speaking, you are strangers to Maya. You have no more claim to this estate than a person walking by on the street. In fact, you have less, because Arthur specifically included a no contest clause that stipulates if any excluded party attempts to litigate this will, a pre-recorded deposition regarding the events of July 2010 will be released to the public record and the local media. My mother looked like she was having a stroke. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth. She realized that her greed had led her right into a trap Arthur had set 15 years ago. He knew they would come for the money. He knew they would try to claim a bond they had shattered. And he had built a legal fortress around me that no lawyer in the country could breach. "Maya," Brianna finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We didn't know. We were just kids. I didn't know they signed those papers." I looked at my sister, the woman who had watched from the window while I sat on my trash bags in the rain. "You knew I was gone," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "You knew I was alone. And you spent the last 15 years enjoying the life they bought with the money they saved by discarding me. You don't get to be the victim here." Henderson, their lawyer, cleared his throat and began to pack his briefcase. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. He walked out of the room, leaving the three of them sitting there in the wreckage of their own making. My mother tried one last time. She reached across the table, her hand shaking. "Maya, honey, we can fix this. We're still your blood. You can't let a piece of paper destroy a family." I stood up and smoothed my jacket. "That piece of paper didn't destroy this family, Evelyn. You did. On July 15th, 2010, you decided that I wasn't worth the cost of a summer camp. You sold your daughter for $6,000 and a trip to Paris. Today, the bill finally came due." I turned to Elena. "We're done here." As I walked out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The harbor outside was still gray, and the wind was still biting, but for the first time in my life, I felt completely solid. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was Maya Sterling Vance, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Settling in a state of that magnitude is a Herculean task, but I had Arthur's voice in my head, guiding me through every commit. Lease agreement and vessel registry. I spent my days in the Vance Maritime headquarters, surrounded by people who had become my real family, the captains who had taught me to read charts, the mechanics who had shown me how to fix a diesel engine, and Elena, who had protected Arthur's legacy with the ferocity of a lioness. But even as I moved forward, the echoes of the past wouldn't completely fade. About a month after the will reading, I received a package. It wasn't from my parents. It was from Brianna. Inside was a small, tattered notebook. I recognized it immediately. It was my journal from when I was 12 years old, the one I thought I had lost in the chaos of the move. There was a note attached to it. It said, "I found this in the attic when Mom and Dad were packing to downsize. I should have given it to you years ago. I'm sorry I stayed behind the curtain. I'm sorry I wasn't the sister you deserved. I don't expect you to call, but I wanted you to have your memories back." I sat on the deck of my house, the salt air whipping through my hair, and read the words of a 12-year-old girl who just wanted to be seen. It was painful, but it was also a gift. It reminded me of why I had fought so hard to build a life of my own. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there was a spark of resilience in me that they could never quite extinguish. I didn't call Brianna right away. I needed time. I needed to know that if I reached out, it was because I wanted to, not because I felt some misplaced sense of obligation. I spent the next few months focusing on the Vance Foundation, a charitable organization I established, in Arthur's name. Its mission was simple: to provide full-ride scholarships and mentorship to foster children and at-risk youth who showed an interest in the sciences. We didn't just give them money, we gave them a network. We gave them the Arthur Vance guarantee that as long as they worked hard, they would never have to sit on a porch in the dark waiting for someone to pick up the pieces. The first group of Vance scholars was inducted in the summer of 2026. Standing on the stage, looking out at 20 young faces full of raw potential and hidden scars, I felt a sense of completion that no bank balance could ever provide. I told them my story. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who fail you the hardest. But I also told them that the world is full of Uncles Arthurs, people who are waiting to see your worth if you just have the courage to keep moving forward. One evening, after the induction ceremony, I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a small, unmarked grave in a cemetery back in Boston. It was my grandmother's grave, the woman I was said to look so much like. The message said she would have been proud of the woman you became. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that when it mattered. George. I looked at the photo for a long time. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from my father. It was weak and it was late, but it was a recognition of my existence. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the photo either. I saved it, a small piece of a puzzle that would never be fully finished. My mother, true to form, didn't go quietly. She tried to sue the estate 2 more times, using different lawyers and increasingly desperate theories of elder abuse and fraudulent adoption. Each time, the cases were tossed out of court within minutes. The final blow came when a local investigative reporter got wind of the porch story. It turned out that a neighbor had seen me sitting there that night in 2010 and had always wondered what happened to the little girl with the trash bags. The resulting article was a scathing indictment of George and Evelyn Sterling's character. They became pariahs in their small community. The country club membership they prized so much was revoked. The social circles they had fought so hard to inhabit closed their doors. They were left with exactly what they had given me, nothing but each other's resentment. A year after Arthur's death, I finally decided to meet Brianna. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between Port Haven and Boston. She looked older than 32. The stress of our parents' downfall had clearly taken its toll. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't a reconciliation in the cinematic sense. There were no tearful embraces or promises of a bright future together, but there was honesty. She told me about the pressure of being the perfect daughter and the fear she had of ever crossing our mother. I told her about the long nights in Maine when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was broken. I can't be your sister yet, I told her as we stood in the parking lot, but I can be someone who knows you. We can start there. She nodded, her eyes wet. That's more than I deserve, Maya. Thank you. As I drove back to the coast, watching the sun dip below the horizon and paint the sky in shades of violet and gold, I thought about the concept of inheritance. Most people think it's about money, land, and titles. But as I looked at the rugged, beautiful coastline that was now my home, I realized that Arthur had left me something far more valuable. He had left me the ability to choose my own family. He had left me the strength to stand in the storm and not be moved. And he had left me the knowledge that my worth was never, ever dependent on the approval of people who couldn't see the light in their own house. I'm Maya Sterling Vance. I am a daughter of the sea, a builder of bridges, and a keeper of legacies. My story started on a dark porch with 2 plastic bags, but it didn't end there. It's still being written, one wave, one scholarship, and one honest conversation at a time. And to anyone out there who's currently sitting on their own metaphorical porch, wondering if the truck is ever going to come, keep your head up. The lights are moving toward you. You just have to be ready to climb into the cab when it arrives. Life continued to move in its steady, rhythmic pace. Vance Maritime was thriving, not just as a business, but as a beacon of stability in Port Haven. We had implemented new environmental standards for our fleet, working with marine biologists to ensure our operations didn't harm the delicate coastal ecosystems. I felt Arthur's presence in every decision I made. Sometimes when the fog rolled in thick and heavy over the harbor, I could almost hear his low, rumbling laugh as he'd tell me that the sea doesn't care about your plans, Maya. She only cares about your preparation. My relationship with Brianna remained a work in progress. We spoke once a month, mostly about mundane things, her job search, my latest project, the books we were reading. It was a fragile bridge, built on the rubble of a shared childhood, but it was standing. She had moved out of our parents' house and taken a job managing a small boutique in a different town. She was finally starting to build a life that wasn't a reflection of Evelyn's ambitions. It was a slow, painful process for her, but I respected the effort Dot as for George and Evelyn. They had drifted into a quiet, bitter retirement. George had reached out a few more times with cryptic messages, but Evelyn had remained silent since the day of the will reading. I think the public exposure was the only thing that could truly hurt her. To a woman who valued perception over reality, being revealed as a mother who sold her child was a fate worse than poverty. I didn't wish them ill, but I didn't wish them well either. They were simply people I used to know, characters in a prologue that I had long since finished reading. One afternoon, a young woman named Sarah came to my office. She was one of the first Vance scholars, a brilliant girl from a broken home who was finishing her first year of a marine engineering program. She sat across from me, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and nerves. She told me she had been offered a prestigious internship on a research vessel in the Pacific, but she was worried about leaving her younger brother behind. He was 10 and things at their home were unstable. I looked at her, and for a split second, I saw myself, the girl who was told her dreams were a distraction. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward, "you take that internship. You go and you learn everything you can. As for your brother, we have a network. We'll find a way to ensure he's safe and supported while you're gone. You don't have to sacrifice your future to save him. We're going to help you both." The look of pure relief on her face was worth more than every property Arthur had left me. It was the moment I realized that the cycle had truly been broken. The legacy of abandonment had been replaced by a legacy of support. I wasn't just managing an estate. I was managing a promise. That evening, I walked down to the docks. As the sun began to set, the Arthur V, our flagship salvage vessel, was tied up at the pier, its hull gleaming in the fading light. I stood there for a long time, listening to the water lap against the wood and the distant cry of the gulls. I thought about the 15-year-old version of me, the one who had just been formally adopted, standing on this same dock with Arthur. He had told me that night that the world was wide and that I could go anywhere I wanted. "I think I'll stay here," I had told him. "Good," he had replied, putting a heavy arm around my shoulders. "The coast needs people like you." I smiled at the memory. He was right. The coast did need people like me. People who knew the value of a solid anchor. People who weren't afraid of the deep, and people who knew that the most important thing you can ever build isn't a fleet or a fortune, but a home where everyone is seen, everyone is heard, and no one is ever left on the porch. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and the promise of a coming storm. I turned and walked back toward the house on the hill, my footsteps steady on the gravel path. I had work to do tomorrow. There were scholars to check on, ships to dispatch, and a future to build. My name is Maya Sterling Vance, and I'm finally truly home. The years began to blend into a tapestry of hard work and quiet satisfaction. Port Haven flourished under the wing of Vance Maritime, and the Vance Foundation became a national model for how private wealth could be used to heal generational trauma. I found myself becoming a mentor not just to the scholars, but to other business leaders who wanted to find more meaning in their work. I spoke at conferences, shared our model for socially conscious logistics, and always told the story of the man who chose a niece over a brother. When I turned 35, I made a decision that felt like the final piece of my own healing. I purchased the old house in the Boston suburbs, the one where I had been left on the porch. It had fallen into disrepair after George and Evelyn were forced to sell it. I didn't buy it to live in, and I didn't buy it out of spite. I bought it to tear it down. I invited Brianna to be there on the day the demolition crew arrived. We stood on the sidewalk as the heavy machinery tore through the walls that had held so much silent misery. It was a cathartic experience. As the roof collapsed and the dust rose into the air, I felt the last remnants of that 13-year-old girl's fear vanish. In its place, I planned to build a community garden and a small neighborhood center, a place where kids could come after school to play, learn, and feel safe. A place where no one would ever be discarded. It looks smaller than I remember, Brianna whispered as the house became a pile of rubble. It was always small, I said. We just didn't know any better. After the demolition, Brianna and I went to lunch. She had recently been promoted to regional manager of her boutique chain, and she seemed more grounded than I had ever seen her. She told me that her father had passed away a few months prior. He had died quietly in a nursing home, never having asked to see either of us in his final days. Evelyn was still alive, living in a small assisted living facility, still clinging to the remnants of her pride, telling the nurses stories about her successful daughter in the fashion industry, while never mentioning the one who owned the harbor. Do you ever think about going to see her? Brianna asked. I shook my head. No, I forgave her a long time ago, but that doesn't mean I need to have her in my life. Some doors are meant to stay closed for a reason. Brianna nodded in understanding. We had found a way to be in each other's lives that was respectful of our different paths. We weren't the best of friends, but we were allies. We were survivors of the same storm, and that was enough. As I look back on my life from the vantage point of 40, I am struck by the sheer unpredictability of it all. If you had told that 13-year-old girl on the porch that she would one day be the head of a maritime empire, a benefactor to hundreds of children, and a woman who truly knew her own worth, she wouldn't have believed you. She would have just asked for a blanket and a kind word. But that's the beauty of a life built on resilience. You don't just survive the bad things, you use them as fuel for the good things. Every cold night on that porch made me more determined to build a warm house. Every dismissal from my mother made me more determined to listen to others. And every ounce of love I received from Arthur, Vance was poured back into a world that desperately needs more of it. The harbor in Port Haven is calm tonight. The stars are reflected in the dark water, and the lighthouse at the point is casting its steady, reassuring beam across the bay. I'm sitting in Arthur's old chair, a glass of cider in my hand, watching the world go by. I am at peace. My inheritance wasn't a burden, it was a bridge. And I have spent every day of my life making sure that bridge is strong enough for anyone who needs to cross it. My name is Mia Sterling Vance. I am the daughter of a man who saw me when I was invisible. I am the sister of a woman who finally learned to look. And I am the guardian of a legacy that proves once and for all that love is the only thing that truly survives. The story of the girl on the porch is over. The story of the woman in the harbor is just beginning. And it is a beautiful story indeed. I think about the nature of family often. We are told from birth that blood is the strongest bond, a tie that cannot be broken. But my life is a testament to the fact that blood can be a shackle and choice can be a wing. The Sterling name was a weight I carried until I was allowed to set it down and pick up the name Vance. It wasn't just a change on a legal document. It was a change in the very marrow of my soul. I see Sarah, the Vance scholar who went to the Pacific, now a leading engineer at a major renewable energy firm. She sends me postcards from every port she visits. Her brother, the 10-year-old she was so worried about, is now a strapping 19-year-old studying architecture. They are my family, the captains who have sailed our ships for decades, who tell stories about Arthur's legendary stubbornness and my keen eye for a good deal. They are my family. Elena, who is now semi-retired but still calls me once a week to talk shop and check in on my well-being. She's my family. And in a strange way, even the memory of that 13-year-old girl is my family. I take care of her every day. I make sure she's fed, I make sure she's warm, and I make sure she knows that she was never, ever the problem. If you are listening to this and you are carrying the weight of a family that doesn't see you, I want you to know something. You are not a spare. You are not an afterthought. You are the protagonist of your own life, and you have the power to change the cast of characters whenever you need to. It might be scary and it might be lonely for a while, but I promise you, the view from the harbor is worth the walk through the dark. The tide is coming in now. I can hear the water rising, filling the tidal pools and lifting the boats higher against the piers. It's a constant grounding rhythm, a reminder that life keeps moving, keeps changing, and always, always offers a new beginning with every sunrise. I think I'll go for a walk along the shore before the moon gets too high. The air is cool, the path is clear, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly where I'm going. I am Maya Sterling Vance, and I am exactly where I belong. The world outside is vast and often indifferent, but in this small corner of Maine, we have built something that matters. We have built a place where family isn't a word used to demand sacrifice, but a word used to offer support. We have built a place where the garbage bags are never filled with a child's life, but with the old dead things we leave behind to make room for the new. I look at the bronze plaque near the harbor entrance, the one that bears Arthur's name. It says, "For those who sail against the wind and those who find their way home." It's a simple tribute, but it says everything. We all sail against the wind at some point. We all face storms that threaten to capsize us. But if we are lucky, and if we are brave, we find the people who will help us reach the shore. I found Arthur, and in doing so, I found myself. And now I spend my days being that shore for others. It is the greatest inheritance I could have ever asked for. The stars are bright over the Atlantic tonight. The lighthouse is turning, its light a steady pulse in the darkness. I take a deep breath of the cold, clean air and smile. My life is full, my heart is steady, and my story, well, my story is finally my own, and that is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. The silence of the night is peaceful, a contrast to the noise of the past. I think of Evelyn sometimes, and I wonder if she ever sits in the quiet and feels the weight of her choices. I wonder if she ever regrets that night in July 2010, But then I realize it doesn't matter. Her regrets are hers to carry, just as my successes are mine to share. We are separate islands now, divided by a vast and unbridgeable ocean of time and truth. And I am perfectly content on my shore. The morning will bring new challenges, new ships to guide, and new scholars to inspire. But for now, in this quiet moment between the stars and the sea, I am simply Maya, a woman who was lost and then was found, and who finally learned that the most important right any of us has is the right to be loved for exactly who we are. And as I close my eyes and listen to the rhythmic pulse of the ocean, I know that I have finally truly inherited the world. Not because of a will or a bank account or a maritime fleet, but because I have inherited the truth of my own worth. And that is a fortune that can never be lost, never be stolen, and never ever be signed away. The end of the beginning. My life is a long, winding road, and I am grateful for every pothole and every detour. They all led me here. They all made me this. And this is exactly who I want to be. The girl on the porch is a memory. The woman in the harbor is a reality. And the future, well, the future is as wide and as deep as the ocean itself. And I am ready for whatever it brings. Good night, Port Haven. Good night, Arthur. And good night to anyone else out there who is still finding their way home. I'll leave the light on for you. I'll be here when you arrive. Because in this house, in this family, no one ever has to wait in the dark. Not anymore. Not ever again doth the waves continue their timeless dance against the shore, a steady heartbeat for a life finally in sync with itself. Every ebb and flow is a reminder of the cycles we endure, the losses that hollow us out and the gains that fill. Use back up. I've learned that the true measure of a person isn't found in their brightest hour, but in how they navigate their darkest night. My darkest night lasted 5 hours on a suburban porch, but it gave me a clarity that most people spend a lifetime seeking. I think about the Vance name again. It's not just a name. It's a standard. It stands for honesty in an industry that can be murky. It stands for loyalty in a world that is often fickle. And most importantly, it stands for the belief that everyone deserves a second act. Arthur gave me mine, and I have dedicated my life to ensuring that the curtain never closes prematurely for anyone else. I see the lights of a distant ship on the horizon, a slow-moving spark against the vast blackness of the sea. It's a freighter, likely carrying goods from halfway across the globe, navigating by the same stars that have guided sailors for millennia. We are all like that ship, I think. We are all carrying precious cargo, trying to reach a harbor where we will be welcomed and unloaded of our burdens. Some of us find our harbor early. Some of us have to sail through many storms before we see the lighthouse, but the harbor is there. It's always there. I turn away from the window and walk through the quiet halls of my home. The walls are covered with photos, not of ancestors I never knew, but of the life I have built. There's a photo of Arthur and me on the day I graduated from college, both of us grinning and covered in a white mist of Maine rain. There's a photo of the first group of Vance scholars, their faces a mosaic of hope and determination. And there's a photo of the garden we built on the site of the old house in Boston, a lush green space where children are laughing and playing in the sun. These are my riches. These are the things that no legal challenge can touch and no greed can diminish. They are the artifacts of a life lived with purpose and a heart that refused to stay broken. As I settle into bed, the sound of the ocean is a familiar lullaby. I am 30 years old, and I have already lived several lifetimes. I have been the rejected child, the grieving niece, the ambitious protégé, and the powerful executive. But tonight, I am simply Maya Sterling Vance, a woman who is loved, a woman who is safe, and a woman who knows, with absolute certainty, that she is exactly where she is supposed to be, The legacy of Arthur Vance lives on, not just in the ships and the buildings, but in the quiet strength of the woman who carries. His name I will continue to sail against the wind. I will continue to find my way home, and I will continue to be the shore for anyone who is still lost at sea, because that is what family does. That is what love is. And that is the only inheritance that truly matters. My journey is far from over, but the direction is clear. I am sailing toward a future that I helped create on a sea that I have learned to respect with a crew that I have chosen myself. The wind is at my back, the stars are above me, and the harbor is waiting. And as I drift off to sleep, I know that whatever tomorrow brings, I will be ready. For I am Maya Sterling Vance, and I have finally, truly, found my way home. The tide is high now, the water pressing against the pilings with a gentle, insistent strength. It's the same strength I feel in my own life, a quiet, unrelenting force that keeps me moving forward, regardless of the obstacles. I think about the many Mayas out there, the children who are being told they aren't enough, the teenagers who are being forced to choose between their dreams and their families, the adults who are still trying to heal from wounds they didn't deserve. I want my story to be a reminder for them. A reminder that the people who walk away from you are not the authors of your ending. They are just a chapter, sometimes a long, painful chapter, but the pen is always in your hand. You get to decide when to turn the page. You get to decide when to start a new volume. The lights of Port Haven are twinkling in the distance, a small cluster of warmth in the vast Maine wilderness. It's a beautiful sight, a sight that reminds me of the importance of community, of connection, and of the simple, profound act of showing up for one another. Arthur showed up for me, and because he did, I can show up for others. It's a chain, reaction of kindness, a ripple effect of love that can change the world if we let it. As I close my eyes for the final time tonight, I am filled with a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the man who saved me, gratitude for the woman who challenged me, gratitude for the sister who found me, and gratitude for the girl on the porch whose courage and resilience made all of this possible. She is the true hero of this story, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is proud of the woman she became. Good night, world. The harbor is safe, the light is on, and the story continues. It always, always continues. The first light of dawn is beginning to touch the horizon, a thin line of pale gold against the retreating shadows of the night. It's the start of a new day, a new year, and a new chapter. I can hear the gulls waking up, their cries echoing over the water. I can hear the first engines of the fishing boats starting up in the harbor. The world is waking up, and so am I. I have a meeting this morning with the board of the Vance Foundation. We are discussing expanding our program to include vocational training for older youth who want to enter the maritime trades. It's another way to honor Arthur's legacy, another way to provide a solid foundation for those who need it most. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about everything that lies ahead. I walk to the window and watch the sun rise over the Atlantic. It's a magnificent sight, a reminder of the power and the beauty of the natural world. A reminder that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises. And no matter how deep the wound, the heart can always heal. I am Maya Sterling Vance. I am a survivor, a leader, and a daughter of the coast. My inheritance is the strength of the ocean, the wisdom of the man who raised me, and the courage to live a life of my own choosing. And as the sun fills the room with its warm golden light, I know that I am exactly where I'm meant to be. My story is far from over, and I can't wait to see what happens next. The horizon is wide, the wind is fair, and I am ready to sail. Good morning, Port Haven. Let's get to work.